everybody, and welcome to the College Basketball, the Road to Madness show, our inaugural show with our man and college sports pundit, Dynamite David, here with us. We're going to get into some college basketball show, I think, 3 weeks on delay due to college basketball essentially being put in about a 4-week delay there. So college basketball seems to be back in full bore here, not getting quite as many cancellations. So I feel at least a little bit comfortable that we can start talking some college basketball. Are you ready to get into some college basketball in the college basketball season, Dynamite?
Yeah, I've been itching to get into it. You know, we're finally getting to the meat of the conference schedule. Seems to be some consistency on these games, and we can really start to narrow down some top rankings and start seeing a playoff picture come together as these teams get through their conferences.
Yeah, I think we'll start out today as our inaugural show. I think I told you to give us our top 6 seeds here, so we'll give you about 4 teams in each of the 1 through 6 seed line. We'll preview a handful of the best games we have coming up on the weekend, and then Monday and Friday we'll be back and we'll start to preview the week's games that are in the upcoming week, and then the weekend's games on Friday, and go over what went down in those. So that'll be the initial show as we get to our top teams, we think, and then from there we'll just start previewing and talking some college basketball as we get into it. So are you ready to get into your top 6 seeds here?
Yes, sir.
All right, so let's start out in the 1. Let's alternate, back and forth, and we'll give our seeds. And if we have a team that's in a lower seed, you give me that seed that you have where, and we'll get into those teams and see what we think about them. So I'll let you start off in the 1 seed bracket. What team do you have in there?
My number 1 seed, and it's really a 1A and 1B, but I'm going to have to give it to Auburn as of right now. Just their road strength of schedule. They've gone into other people's houses and played really well. Gonzaga's looked good. They have dropped one more game than Auburn, so that's why I'm going to give the edge to Auburn at number 1 there.
Yeah, I have them just in my 1 seed bracket. I really debated on them a little bit. I wanted to move Arizona in there. I really like the way they've been playing. They both have one of those sort of weird early season losses on the road. Auburn went up to Yukon and lost in the double OT, and Arizona went to Tennessee and lost that game in their first real challenge. But both teams, I think, have bounced back. So like you, I have Arizona in my 1 seed column here. The one thing that I concerns me about Auburn is their best player easily is, Jabari Smith. But I think the guards, both KD Johnson and Wendell Green, seem to dominate the ball a little more than I like. Jabari Smith right now, you could probably argue, should be the number 1 pick in the NBA draft. And he sort of sometimes, I think when I watch them play, seems like their 3rd or 4th option. And I find that a little weird. So I'm not full bore on thinking Auburn is quite up there with, say, Gonzaga. But I don't think you can argue with the way they've played so far this year.
I just want to be clear. I may have misspoke earlier. Did I say Arizona? I definitely meant to say Auburn was 1A and Gonzaga was 1B.
Yeah.
Arizona is not in my 1 quadrant at this point.
Yeah. I got Arizona just off my 1 quadrant. I was the one debating whether to put them or Auburn in there. I think the next couple teams in our 1 will be, definitely Gonzaga in them. But Auburn, I think, has earned it with their wins of late versus Alabama and the LSU win earlier. The only thing other than that, I think their schedule, other than a couple of those SEC games, has been a little light. And I think we're going to see it, pop up here late, especially this weekend with Kentucky. They have Oklahoma in there, Alabama again, Arkansas comes in there, an interesting A&M team who battled Kentucky. So I think the schedule will pop up and we'll get a true sense of where Auburn really lies. But I think right now you can't leave them out of your 1 seed. So you went with Auburn. Next up for me, I'm going to go with the Gonzaga Bulldogs here. I think that's probably in everybody's 1 seed market. A couple losses in there. Duke, Alabama, I don't know if you quite mark them down, but basically they have annihilated everybody but those two losses there, including pretty impressive wins over UCLA, over Texas Tech, who's really played well. I think the 20, 30-point win over BYU a week ago, also pretty impressive. So are you also in there with Gonzaga in your one seats?
Yeah, I've got them right behind Auburn, and it's really close. This Gonzaga team compared to last year, I think they're a little bit they're not quite as deep as far as talent goes on the roster. You know, Timmy's been playing really, really well, but I just don't think they have quite as many weapons to go to this year. So, you know, we'll see if some of these guards step up come as we get closer to tournament time, because, you know, you've got to have great guard play to make it deep into the tournament. But Gonzaga, what they've done so far with their offense, they got to be right there at number one and then one seed as well.
Yeah, they're an interesting team because, you mentioned Timmy, and they're really sort of post-oriented. You mix in Holmgren in there. I think everybody thought he was going to be a little bit better shooter than he has been, but I don't think you can argue with his play, especially on the defensive side of things. But and then you got the freshman in there, Ben Gregg, who also a big body, who actually is the one who sits down there and plays the post when Timmy comes out. So it's a really interesting team. And then you got their guards who they're so sort of a little bit hot and cold, and I think that's what's cost them on a couple of games where they couldn't hit shots. Chet doesn't seem quite ready to take on that scoring load, and then they can shut down Timmy, down in the post there. So, but overall, they do have a lot of very high-quality players on this team, though, even with that said. So I'm curious to see if they'll be able to make the run and be able to make a run through the West Coast Conference undefeated. I think the West Coast Conference is a little deeper than people think, with BYU in there, who they already beat by about 30. St. Mary's and San Francisco, both pretty high-quality teams, in that conference. I don't know if they can get 4 in there, but I do think there are at least 4 quality, at least NCAA tournament level teams. So who do you got next on your 1 seed list here?
Next up, despite a couple ugly losses recently, I'm going to go with Baylor. I'm still impressed with this Baylor team. I think they've carried over a lot of their success from last year, both strong defensively and offensively. So I think they're going to recover, and they're right up there in the ones with these guys.
Yeah, you mentioned it. I think this is the most overall solid team on both sides of the ball. You can't say they don't play defense, they don't play offense. It's sort of really good offense, really good defense. I thought there'd definitely be a lot more of a drop-off, from last year to this year. Basically, we could probably say the last 2 years to this year, because 2 years ago, before the tournament was canceled, they were definitely, one of the elite teams, one of the favorites to win it. And they lost a handful of those guys, but they just seem to, guys who were there, who were in lesser roles, have now stepped up, and they're playing really, really well. That Rockton Joe, it's fun to watch him play guard, and he's sort of taken right over, where they left off here. So I really like this team. Other than, you mentioned it, they've lost 2 tough games in a row, but I don't think you really mark anyone down for losses, to Texas Tech, Oklahoma State. They had a nice win versus West Virginia the other day. So,
I love the way this team, they're just so well-rounded. They got four guys averaging in double figures. I think they've got like 6 guys that are getting 20 minutes or more. So they go really deep, and they really play good team basketball.
Yeah.
So I think that brings a lot of success in the tournament.
Definitely so. And we'll be living in a world where Scott Drew might be a back-to-back champion. I don't know if any of us had wagers on that 5 years ago, when it seemed like Baylor would have a good regular season and then be bounced out in the first round. Next up for me, my last team in the 1 seed range is the Houston Cougars. They aren't always, I'd say, pleasant to watch. It's though I will say offensively they've been much, much improved from last year. But I just love Kelvin Sampson teams. Say what you will about how he acquires talent, but nonetheless, talent gets there and he wins basketball games. And once again, I think this is a really, really top tier team that's not getting talked about. And I like the way also they can play defense and offense on both sides of the ball. Their schedule strength isn't quite as, deep as a couple of the other ones. But I watch this team and it just has depth, has quality. Now, one of their best players is out for the season, but they haven't seemed to fallen off too much, and their only loss is a 2-point loss on a neutral site to Wisconsin and a 1-point loss away at Alabama. So you can't really fault them, and pretty much everybody else they've played, they've beaten up on pretty good. So
yeah,
I'm really big on Houston here.
I've actually got Houston further down because I think you can kind of fault them for losing the only two tough games they've played all season. They do play really good
win over Oregon. I will say that.
Yeah. That is true, but very weak schedule here. I think if they, keep winning, they may move up in my rankings, but it'll be a little bit longer before we get to them in my rankings.
Yeah. All right. Anyone else left in your 1 seeds? Who's your last one here?
Yeah, my last number 4, I've actually, despite, they climbed all the way up to number 1 and then proceeded to lose a couple games again. I like Purdue. I think they just came back, got a really solid win over a Big Ten leading Illinois team, rebounded really well, and they've got the number 1 adjusted offense in the country. So I got to put them up there. They're better than Gonzaga efficiently on offense. So got to put them up there.
Yeah. I have them a little bit further down. They're into my 3 seed tier. Now,
that's where I've got Houston. So
yes, I will say I'm also making a little bit of a hedge that they lose tonight as we're recording this to Indiana. So we're hedging our bets a little bit. I really struggle with them because I look at that Wisconsin loss, I look at that road loss to Rutgers, and I try to not tell myself, what do I think this team will do in the NCAA tournament? We're looking now and what we think of those teams. But I will admit, it creeps in my head. And I'm like, if I have my tournament bracket here now and I'm filling it out, I don't know how far I put this team in. And if the right matchup comes along, they're always one of those candidates I sit there and look at and I think can bounce out early. Now, that being said, this is probably the best season they've had since, some of those Gene Katie and, big dog teams squared up. So I just look at that Rutgers loss probably more than anything away. And I'm like, if it's one of those right nights where their offense isn't clicking, I don't think they defensively can stand up to some of those elite tier teams. So that's why I put them third. Also with the little bit of a hedge, maybe a hint on who I bet on tonight as well, that they might lose to Indiana tonight as well. All right, let's move into our 2 seeds. And I talked about them a little bit here, but I have Arizona as my top 2 seed. I mixed and matched them and Auburn and tried to switch, and I think just Auburn's, there are a couple wins on their slate that are a little bit more impressive than Arizona's. Arizona's schedule was really, really weak at the start of the year. Then they went to Tennessee for their first really tough game, lost that one. That being said, they bounced back and had a win at Colorado that's pretty solid. Utah, a nice win. So not great wins. I think their schedule's still soft, but I will say when I watch this team play basketball, which might be why I have them so high, is I really like watching them play basketball. It's got a real sort of smooth European style to it, and they're just fun to watch overall. So that's why I have them so high.
Yeah, I also have them as my number 1 2 seed here. Like you said, schedule's been really weak. Otherwise, they'd be right up there in the number 1. But their schedule is, difficulties coming. They could either jump right up there with the top dogs, Gonzaga and Auburn here really quick, or they could fall really quick as well. I think next Tuesday they play UCLA. if I'm not mistaken. So their schedule's going to start picking up. But talented team. But I'm ready to see them play some other good teams.
Yeah, definitely. Tricky one with Stanford coming up next Thursday, and then they got UCLA sandwiched in between Arizona and a USC matchup in the next 2 weeks. So we'll know a lot more, and maybe in 2 or 3 weeks we'll come back and redo this and see if Arizona still sticks up in there. What do you have next for your 2 seeds?
Next up, I think they just dropped one last night to Marquette, but I've got Villanova in my 2 seed slot. I think there's another really strong, well-rounded team. They play really good defense, and they scored the ball really good, and just got some really impressive wins recently, and a really well-coached team.
Yeah, I as well have them in my 2 seed line, and this one's interesting because they definitely have the most losses of, anyone that we have this high, either of us. And you look at that, and then you look at their losses, and it's UCLA, it's Purdue, it's Baylor.
Yeah.
The Creighton loss on the road, I don't look as, some people might look at it as a bad loss, but if you watched Creighton the other night with teams going in there, it's really difficult to win in Creighton, and they got them back when Creighton went up into Philadelphia and played them, and they won that game by 30-plus points. And then you mentioned last night, tough game versus Marquette. They lost 57-54. And I think that's where the only thing you could probably say negative about Villanova is they have these weird games where they just can't score. And they got a couple of them on here on their losses where they can't score at all. You mentioned that Baylor game where they scored 36 points, the Marquette game where they scored 54. So it's just a weird thing where they have that random sort of night where they can't put the ball in. They're really, really dependent on shooting, which might kill them in the tournament, but it also might want to be one of those things where they hit that hot streak and ride through and make a nice run in the Final Four here. All right, next up for me, I had UCLA right after Arizona, and I think people are sleeping a little bit on UCLA. They did have to pause a whole lot of their season. They're only 11-2, so they've only played 13 games, but their only losses are Gonzaga and OT loss to Oregon. Bounced back this weekend with a win versus Oregon State. I just like this UCLA team. They probably, I think everybody was expecting maybe a little bit more from them, but I thought they've looked pretty solid so far this year, and I think they're definitely one of those teams where I look in my NCAA tournament bracket, and I could definitely see making a Final Four run here.
Yeah, and they've got plenty of time to move their way back up into this in this one spot here. I think Pac-12 strong this year, so if they can win some more games, they can move up in there and get in good position for the tournament. But I don't have them in my 2 spot. I've got them a little bit lower than you.
Where do you have UCLA in yours?
I've got them in a 3 seed.
You got them in a 3 seed.
One notch down.
I think I moved them into my 2 because I felt like if I had Villanova in there, I had to have UCLA in there just because they've played each other and UCLA won that game in overtime. So granted it was pretty early in the season, but I think if you move Villanova in there, you probably can't not have UCLA in there because I think they're probably pretty similar teams with a similar sort of talent base in there. So both in and around a 2 seed for me right after that. So what do you got next?
Next up, I've got Kansas in my 2 seed. They've got, just 2 losses on the year, a 1-point loss versus Dayton, and then a not so close loss to Texas Tech. But this is another solid Kansas team, about where they always are. They are a little too dependent on their star Agbaji, but he's great, and they're deserving of that 2 seed.
Yeah, I think this is probably the sort of sleepiest team anybody's been on Kansas because I
Nobody's talking about it.
I don't hear anybody talk about them. I hear them talk about Texas. I hear them talk about Texas Tech. I hear them talk about Iowa State. And then it's Kansas who sits there at 15-2. You mentioned it with, a 1-point neutral site loss to a pretty solid Dayton team, and then on a road loss to Texas Tech. So, coming off 3 straight wins, Iowa State, West Virginia, and Oklahoma, which is 3 nice wins in a row. One of those away at Oklahoma. So, really interesting that this Kansas team isn't getting a whole lot of, love. And someone like Duke, who I noticed neither of us have mentioned quite yet, still gets a lot of love. Now, granted, they have, the draft starts, and Kansas doesn't necessarily have, top 3 NBA picks on their roster, but every time I've watched them play, they've been really, really solid. So I just think this Kansas team really sort of flying under the radar right now, and 2 seed for both of us here. So what 2 seeds do you have left?
I have one more, and it's a little bit of a shocker here. They jumped up mainly based on their last couple weeks of play, but they have really impressed me, and that's the Kentucky Wildcats. I really wanted to put them kind of in this 3, maybe a 4 spot, but I really think the way they're playing now, they're one of the best teams in the country. So I had to give them a 2 spot there.
Yeah, I was right along your thinking there. I put them as a 3. You jumped them up into a 2. I could see that because I think the last, 2.5, 3 weeks, they've been playing really good basketball. I was impressed last night going into A&M in a really tricky spot and sort of fighting through a game where they didn't play well, but still got the win. So that was nice. They're showing a little bit more toughness than they have the last, couple years here. So, they played pretty well. The thing that concerns me is, that weird little Notre Dame loss. Not a very good Notre Dame team. So, and that being said, you sort of look at their SEC schedule so far, and other than the LSU game, which they lost, it's been Missouri, Georgia, Vanderbilt, Tennessee, Texas A&M. They haven't quite yet gone through the gauntlet other than LSU, and they've lost that one. So
very big game Saturday.
Yes, a very big game Saturday, and then a tricky Miss State game that's sandwiched between that and Kansas. So I think it'll be an interesting, next couple games for them for sure. So we'll move on to this 3 seeds, and I mentioned Purdue and Kentucky were 2 of mine in the 3 seed category. So I'll move on to my next one, and that's the team that beat Kentucky, and that's LSU. I really like this team. Granted, they're coming off back-to-back losses here, but, Arkansas, Alabama, and Auburn are the 3 losses on the year. I don't think you can really fault anyone on this one. And the thing I like about this team is they're built defensively, and I don't think we have probably ever said that in the history of man on a Will Wade coach team, but nonetheless.
That is true.
This team is built defensively, and I think finally they maybe have a recipe for a deep run in the tournament here. I really like the way they've played, despite the last 2 games where they've sort of dropped a couple here. But I don't really fault them on Arkansas or Alabama losses there, especially a road loss, 3-point to Alabama.
Yeah, I've got them 1 notch down. I've got them in a 4 seed spot. One thing, you said they're built defensively, and I do really like to watch their defense. Now, their offense can't do anything unless it's fed off of that defense.
Yeah.
So what Alabama did to them yesterday is if you can force them into a half-court offense, they're not going to score the ball. So teams have just got to figure out how to beat the press, take care of the ball, force them to a half-court game, and you can beat this LSU team. But if they figure out the half-court offense and hit some shots, they can play with anybody.
Yeah, I don't know when we've ever said we need a Will Wade team to find a way to score some points, and they don't have to worry about the defensive end. But that's sort of how it's played out here. So what do you got on that 3 seed line left?
All right, so we already talked about Houston and UCLA. I've got them as 2 of my 3s. Next up, I've got Duke in my 3 seed spot. really kind of struggled with where to put this Duke team because, they get a lot of press, but that, their schedule's been weird. They've had a lot of games canceled, and it's just kind of, I look at their record, I look at their KenPom rankings, and I think this 3-4 area is probably the right spot for them. We'll see as they go through this ACC schedule. But ACC's really down this year, and I think that's going to hurt them climbing up these rankings.
Yeah, I struggled whether to put them at a 3 or 4. I dropped them to like my top number 4 seed because I just don't see a lot of consistency from this team. Every time, they put together a stretch of a handful of wins, then they come up against, another team that's in and around their level. That being, prime example, Tuesday, playing Florida State. Probably not the best Florida State team we've ever played, but, they did their thing, bullied Duke around, got the win there. A couple weeks ago, they came up against a pretty solid Miami team who's starting to streak a little bit, lost that one there, and that was a home game. They lost there. And then I think that sort of Big Ten ACC challenge where they played Ohio State, I struggled with a lot of the Big Ten teams and where to put them as well because I don't quite know how good they are because they just seem to beat each other. And I know everybody says that's a show of how strong they are, but I don't know if it quite is. That's what they all said last year about all those Big Ten teams entering the tournament, and then they were all gone by the first weekend. So I struggle.
Well, it's funny.
Yeah, go ahead.
I hear that about the SEC a lot too, and they'll get sometimes 7, 8 teams in the tournament, and then you look up and there's 1 or 2 in the Sweet 16. So
yeah, I'm okay with like Alabama cannibalizing like Kentucky. I get weird, we'll get to Michigan State, but Michigan State loses at home to a Northwestern. That's where I'm like, yeah, I just watched Northwestern lose to a Maryland team who's been in complete disarray all season long. So that's where I get a little weird about that. So they do have the big win over Gonzaga, 84-81. If you watch that game, that basically could have gone any way at any point in time. Someone just made a couple shots late. Now, granted, that's how a lot of these games versus top teams are decided, but that could have just as easily been a loss than a win. It wasn't like a dominant performance. So, yeah, I struggled a little bit where to go with Duke. I will say they do have playmakers. I think their ceiling is pretty high, but right now, just the inconsistency that I've seen from them, I got them as my top sort of 4 seed there.
Well, how many times do we see these teams where they get these one and done NBA guys, and it takes the length of a season for them to finally start gelling, and sometimes when they pull it together right when it's time, that's when they get those national championships.
Yeah, definitely so, and I think I flipped them and my next team on my 3 seed line, Alabama. I think them and Duke are in and about the same. Both got a win over Gonzaga. Both got a handful of weird losses. Now, granted, Alabama has more weird losses on there.
Yeah.
Iona is a very good small school team, so it not a bad loss, but it's also probably not a team they should be losing to. Same with the Memphis game.
Pitino.
Yeah, same with the Memphis game there. Granted, Memphis has a lot of very talented players, but they haven't seemed to put that talent together. I'm curious what they're going to do tonight. And then you had that little weird 3-game stretch, that they just got out of after a win versus LSU, where they lost to Missouri, Auburn, and Mississippi State. 2 of those on the road, granted, but they should be beating, Missouri and Mississippi State. Probably the same as Davidson, but Davidson also, a pretty good basketball team, and we're at least in my preliminaries, to maybe jump into a top 6 spot here. So, every one of these teams they've lost to at least has talent or is a good team, but probably a couple too many losses there. But I just like this Alabama team. I think it's a really, really good team with a really good coach, and I think you saw that last year when they made their tournament run.
Yeah, I've got Bama just a little bit lower. I've got them in a 4 slot, so just one notch down. I really liked them. They looked really good in that win against LSU. But it's going to take me a long time to forget about that Missouri loss because I don't know.
I think that's the one that sticks out the most.
Did you happen to see what Arkansas did to Missouri about a week and a half ago?
Yes, I did. Got old Coos canned. So, all right. So what do you have left on your 3-seed line?
My last 3 seed, I've got Wisconsin. They kind of fall into that group of those Big Ten teams that you were talking about where they kind of cannibalize each other. But I think Wisconsin's probably one of the more well-rounded of the second-tier Big Ten teams other than, below Purdue on that line there. But I like them defensively, and we'll see where they come out of the pack once the conference play starts to resolve. But right now, I've got them in a 3 spot for what they've done this season.
Yeah, I left them out because they were I grouped about 5 of those Big Ten teams in there.
Yeah,
and
Michigan State, Iowa State, Ohio State, Wisconsin, they're all right in kind of the same area.
Yeah, I grouped them, and they were sort of the one, despite their record, that I looked at, and it was like, I least trust you. So I sort of bounced them out. Now, they might be overall like the most consistently night-to-night team, but like high-end level, I think they're probably like, I think Michigan State can reach a higher end. I think Illinois can reach a higher end. I even think somebody like Ohio State and Iowa on the right night can reach probably a top end better than Wisconsin, but they also can lose to the aforementioned Northwestern on a night, some of these teams, which I don't think like a Wisconsin would do, which they didn't do because they beat them, a week ago. But they also beat Maryland. They seem to have the least level of sort of upset ability. But I don't know if they'll be able to sort of beat the elite teams. And I look at that with, that loss to Providence. And that's sort of where I think I sort of glom Wisconsin, probably around that same line as Providence. They were one of my last sort of knockouts on my 6-seed rankings. So that's why I didn't quite put Wisconsin in there. All right, I'll move on to my 4 seeds here. We talked about Duke, and I'll go to sort of my leader in the Big Ten side of things, and that's still Illinois. I think they have sort of the deepest and higher end talent. Now, they also might be the most sort of disappointing team to start the season. Now, a lot of that was early losses to said Marquette and Cincinnati. Marquette's been hot, cold, hot, cold. They seem to go on very weird stretches where they can beat anyone, and then they have stretches where they seem to lose to anyone. And then, the other night they lost to Purdue, but that was a 2-overtime game. So, I'm a little less to knock that down. But I think I look at this team, and I think the highest upside of teams in the Big Ten outside of Purdue probably, I think, is Illinois. And I just think they have probably the deepest roster here, starting with Kofi, who's just a monster down in the post.
Yeah. So we'll get into my 4 teams. We've already talked about LSU. They're right there, and I think they've got potential to keep moving up. But next, I've got Texas Tech. They were the first team to knock off that really hot Baylor team earlier this season. They've kind of had a little bouncy road the last couple of weeks. They get a big win, big loss, big win, big loss. But I think they're right there as the number 2 team in the Big 12 behind Baylor. So I've got them in the 4 spot.
Yeah, I dropped them down a peg into my 5 just because I haven't liked the way they looked, probably based because of that Kansas State game that sort of sticks out, like a sore thumb to me. They went to Iowa State and lost just a gross game, 51-47 a couple weeks ago that I didn't love. And then they have that Providence loss in there. Providence, very interesting team that I didn't quite know whether to bump them in there because they've sort of had they had a great non-conference season, and then they kicked off the conference season and been a little wishy-washy in the conference season, so I didn't know quite how to play with that. But I do like this Texas Tech team. It's just a hard read. They still have the Chris Beard sort of DNA, but they don't have Chris Beard. And I have him on the 5 line right next to the Chris Beard team that he's currently coaching. So, I have them down a peg as that 4 seed just because I just haven't loved the way they've looked the last week or so. But next up for me on this line, I got Xavier in my 4 seeds here. I actually wasn't expecting a whole lot from Xavier. They've really sort of surprised me at how well they've played this way. Travis Steele really has them playing well. Watched that game on Saturday versus Creighton. Got a nice win there, 80-73. Their only 3 losses are a neutral site to Iowa State and then 2 losses to Villanova. They got good wins versus Marquette and Cincinnati. Oklahoma State and Virginia Tech are nice wins too. They got that good win early in the season over Ohio State. So I just love the way this team plays. Pretty solid team on both offensive and defensive side of the ball. Play at a pretty decent pace. And I just like the way this team plays. Not a lot of stars, but a lot of solid, pretty deep basketball players on this one. So I like this team a whole lot.
Yeah, I've got them dropped down a little bit lower than you. I've got them in my 6th spot. Just haven't. I probably should have them higher, especially since I've got Villanova up there in the 2. But I need to see a little bit more from Xavier and just consistency. But my last 2, 4, I've got Illinois and Alabama. We've already talked about them, so I'm ready to move on to 5s if you are.
All right, let's move on to our 5s, and I'll give you my number 1 5, and that's BYU. I don't think people are looking at them as much as as they should. Now, granted, they play out in the West Coast Conference, and it's a little bit hard to sort of keep up with them, but they really have a good basketball team when they play their game. They had a bad little stretch there where they didn't play well, but they also were without their best player for about 2 weeks there. So a couple of those losses, the Vanderbilt loss was right dead in the middle of, one of those. But I look at that San Diego State and Oregon win early in the season, really like those wins. Missouri State, who's probably the 2nd best team out of the Missouri Valley with Drake. If you axe off Loyola Chicago, Missouri State's really good team. Liberty they have a pretty nice win. And then I looked at that win over St. Mary's a couple weeks ago with the nice win, along with the win over San Francisco just this week. San Francisco, really good basketball team. But I just like this way Mark Pope has these guys playing. Really, really fun to watch. Good defensive team, gritty, and when they get their mojo going on the offensive end, they're tough to beat and tough to score on. So I like this BYU team. I think they can make a run here.
Yeah, I've got them just on the outside of my 6th seed. I've got them in also receiving votes. So just really couldn't find a home for them in there looking at some of the other teams that I like. But
with with a couple of their bad losses, I sort of understand it. But I moved them into my 5 because when they're on their game, I think they're really in there on their pack. Now, when they're off their game, they can lose.
Well, their schedule's been surprisingly strong for the conference they're in. So, you got to give them credit for that. But we'll see if they can pull off some more wins.
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier, but the West Coast Conference has 4 legit teams that are in and around tournament level with San Francisco, St. Mary's, the Zags, and BYU. So, most years you look at the West Coast Conference and think sort of a dud, but they're 4 pretty solid teams in that conference this year who could, I doubt they'll get 4, but they might be able to sneak at least 3 in there for sure. So, I have them. What do you have next on your 5 seed line?
All right, so we haven't got to any of my fives yet, but the majority of my 5 seeds is a Big Ten party. We're going to start off with Michigan State. We talked about a little bit about them earlier. Just they've got some talent, they've got capabilities of beating anybody, but their consistency isn't there. They have nights where they don't show up, and they just struggle to really put points on the board sometimes. So if they can score a little bit more consistently, they could be a really solid team. Maybe even win the Big Ten. Haven't shown it yet. That's why I've got them below a few teams. But yeah, I've got them right in the 5.
Yeah. I'm torn on them a little bit, but they definitely can see them getting in there. And they probably deserve to be on that line. Like I said, Big Ten wise, it's like a Yahtzee game where I just roll the dice and see who comes up, because I have trouble discerning one from the other.
I mean, really only one bad loss.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at their schedule, you got a loss to Kansas to start the year and then Baylor.
Yes.
And then, but you've got that really ugly Northwestern loss. But yeah. I think other than that, they've played really well this year.
I think that's what probably switched my decision and dropped them down a seed a little bit, is because basically, I bet against Northwestern in that Maryland game, and then I was like, yeah, Northwestern's awful, and then watched them go up there when we talked about doing this and then beat them, and I'm like, okay, I dropped them down to my 6 seed level because they stepped up. You mentioned those 2 early games, lost to the elite teams.
Yeah. They
have a couple decent wins in there, but nothing I'd call like great. And then, a bad loss in there. And I don't know. I just, something in my head says don't trust them. Next up for me, I have Colorado State on my 5 seed line. I know you didn't like this one, but I just love this team. Handful of good wins. Granted, their schedule hasn't been great, but they got a neutral site win over Creighton. They got a nice win over St. Mary's. They got a win over Mississippi State. So they got a couple decent wins in there. Granted, they went to San Diego State and got throttled. Not a ton of shame in that. Lots of people go into San Diego State and get throttled. They haven't played the schedule, but I've watched this team a lot. I've tried to bet on them a little bit, but their spread numbers are always in the 20s. Granted, they end up usually beating teams by those 20-point spreads, but it's enough to sort of scare me off. And it is a hard read because they do have a nice home court advantage too up in Fort Collins, up in the atmosphere. So it's a little bit difficult for teams to go on the road there and play. But I've just watched this team and I love the way they play offense. And another team that sort of plays this European smooth style that I really like. So I love watching them play. Maybe I have a little bias because I love watching them play so much, but I really like this team a whole lot, and I think they're one of the elite teams. I think if they get in the tournament, they can make a little bit of a run here.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't even have them in my others receiving votes outside of the 6 seed, so they're a little further down for me. Next up in my 5 spot, I've got a team that I think a lot of people are sleeping on, but they're right there behind Texas Tech, I believe. I've got Iowa State. I think they've played really well this year. They got a really good win early in the year against Xavier and a win over Memphis. But they have, they've dropped big games in the Big 12 so far. They lost to Baylor, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas Tech. They did get a win over Texas last week. But they just, they're dropping the big ones, but they got a couple early. There's still plenty of room in that schedule, but I think they're right there, the 3rd, 4th best team in the Big 12. So I've got them in the 5.
Yeah. This was probably my hardest one to rank because I think when I originally had wrote it down, I had them maybe on a 3 or 4 line. And then I'm like, you can't do that with how they've played the last couple weeks. But then I'm like, how much do you really knock them? They have a home loss to Baylor, which was their first loss on the season. And then they come back, beat Texas Tech at home, and then they have this stretch, but it's Oklahoma away, Kansas away, beat Texas at home, and then Texas Tech away. So, I mean, who really on that schedule line of Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas Tech all away, and then Texas at home is really going to have a great record in that. So I kept them in my 6, even though they've, dropped 4 of their last 6 games, because I just think they're a really good basketball team. I love TJ Olsenberger.
Yeah.
Great coach. I thought that was a great hire for Iowa State. And I'm curious to see when all these teams, come back and play in Iowa State, if they can sort of bang with them there and get those wins back. Because I think right now, I think this team is better than what we've seen the last couple weeks. It's just sort of that bad sort of schedule run there where they played a lot of top teams in a grouping set all on the road. But I'm like you. I really think this is a good basketball team, but I had to drop them down a little bit. I ended up putting them as a 6 seed, but it should say something that I first started thinking about it around 3-4 seed line with this team. So I think they have a chance to really jump up there, but I like this Iowa State team for sure. All right, next on my list, my last one in my 5 seeds is Texas. I told you I grouped them sort of right up there with Texas Tech. They, too, have gone through a little bit of a bad stretch here in Big 12 conference season. But that Kansas State home loss the other night sort of really pushed it down, because I had them a little bit higher than this as well, because I think this is a really good team, and I pretty much trust Chris Beard to win important games and win tournament games. We've already seen him do that with Texas Tech, which has basically been a nothing program pretty much throughout the history of basketball, and he turned them around and won NCAA tournament games. And I also think this is one of the more talented Texas teams that they've had in a while. What went wrong with Shaka Smart there, I don't know, because he went up to Marquette and they seem to be playing pretty good basketball. Don't know why it didn't work there, but it didn't work. And Chris Beard, I think, has them playing pretty good basketball. Just a little bit of a struggle late, but I think this is a pretty good Texas team here.
All right, I've got 2 left in my 5 seeds. I'm going to start off with another Big Ten. I got Ohio State coming in here. They've got some big wins on their schedule. Not too many terrible losses. They've dropped 4 this year. At Xavier, and then the Florida game, Indiana, and Wisconsin. But I think they've got some really good talent here. They got a big win over Duke. So I'm going to give them a lot of credit on their strength of schedule here, and I think it's good enough, even with their 4 losses, to be in the 5 seed.
Yeah, they were one I didn't know what to do with, and I just bounced them out because other than that Duke win and maybe Seton Hall, who I very much wanted to put in my top 6, but that was going to lean too homer with the way they've been playing of late. Also, I tried to push the Bonnies in there. Thanks for losing this weekend for me, so I couldn't move you into my top 6 seeds. But it seems like every time they step up, you mentioned Xavier that lost to Florida, lost to Indiana, lost to Wisconsin. None of them bad losses, but it looks like every time they seem to step up a level, they can't hang with these teams. I'm interested, what they can do when they play, a Michigan State, replay Indiana. I'm curious on the matchup of Purdue as well that I think is in 2 weeks on a Sunday. So I think I'll have a little bit better feel of them. Granted, Chris Holtzman's teams always seem to execute well on offense, but it just seems like every time I've watched them and expected them to step up, they lose that big game. They seem to be hanging a lot on their, Duke win there.
All right, we're going to finish off my 5 seeds with USC, another Pac-12 team. I think they're kind of just a tier down below UCLA and Arizona, but solid team. They had a lot of COVID and postponements that kind of messed with some good games that were on their schedule. Dropped one at Stanford, and then one to Oregon, who's surging a little bit. This Oregon team, they got some teams got Oregon early when they were trying to figure things out, and I think this Oregon team is a much improved team over what they were earlier this season. So I don't knock them for that loss. Just won a tight one today against Colorado. So I like this USC team. Only 2 losses. I think that's good enough for a 5 seed.
Yeah, I put them right on my top level on the 6. I like watching this team play.
Mobley's great.
Yeah, the other Mobley, not the one who's winning with the Cavs, his brother. It would be really great if they had both still. I will say that. They might be higher than a 6 seed on my line. But yeah, a little bit of this was eye test because they don't have, a ton of great wins on their schedule. They have the nice San Diego State win. But other than that,
they had about a month off there.
Yeah, and that I think that's what's playing. But like I said, I like watching them play. Eyeball test, I think this is a really, really good team. They didn't help me out with the Stanford loss very much in the eyeball test. But like you said, that Oregon loss, granted it was at home, but that Oregon team is sort of becoming more. I think at the beginning of the year, where we thought Oregon would be, which is, maybe not UCLA level, but just, under UCLA. So I think it'll be a good battle between USC and UCLA to see who can, USC and Oregon to see who can get that sort of 2 spot underneath them. So, yeah, this was more of an eyeball test. I think this USC team, really good team. And I put them right on my sort of top line there on the 6 seed. All right, I'll go to my next team on the 6th seed. I know you talked about wanting to put them on here. I did put them on here because I think they've sort of earned it. I put Loyola Chicago on here. They've just played really good basketball. 2 losses on the year. The 2 losses are Michigan State by 2 points and Auburn by 9. And if you watched any of that Auburn game, they played them pretty tight. Probably one of the closer, toughest games Auburn's had all season long. Win-wise, it's not been great. They beat up on Arizona State, who is not a great basketball team. The win looks better on a piece of paper than it does if you actually watch Arizona State play basketball. DePaul was playing okay basketball for a stretch there. Their best win is probably that San Francisco win. But if you watch this team play and if you go into history, I don't love going into history, but I think the last 3 or 4 years, Loyola Chicago's shown they can play with top-tier teams. So I factor that in a little bit, too. I think they can play with top-tier teams, and I think they'll be an automatic, bid team short of disaster in the MVC. So, but I really like the way this team plays, and I thought they deserved at least a 6 seed spot for me.
All right, my first 6 seed we're going to start with is another team a lot of people are sleeping on. I think I don't hear a whole lot about them, but it's the Yukon Huskies. I think they've played really well this year. They've got 4 losses, but they've all been close, 1 in overtime, and then 3 by 3 or 4 points. Big win against Auburn earlier in the year. I think that gives them a lot of credit as far as seeding purposes, and they just they've got some tougher games on their schedule. They got the Providence game was postponed. Another game against Xavier was postponed. So they've missed some opportunities to make a statement. But I like the way UConn's recovering up there, and I think they're building something good.
Yeah. I have to be honest, I had no clue what to do with this team. And a little bit is just based on my gambling bias, because I think I've taken against them 3 times, and it's been West Virginia, Providence, and Seton Hall. So when I bet on them 3 times and they lose all 3 of those games, I think I have a little bit in my head what they are. And I don't think I've ever bet on them so far this season as a favorite. I wasn't paying a ton of attention on that November 24th Auburn game, I have to admit. But if you look at teams' best wins of the year, UConn probably has one of the best wins on the year, beating that Auburn team, because that Auburn team has played great basketball ever since. So,
yeah.
like I said, I just don't totally know what to do with them. I know Dan Hurley always will have his teams executing and playing good basketball, but I just think there's a little like mental block in my head because I've made like 3 bets all against this team and I've won all 3 bets. So I'm like, how good could they really be if I'm betting, taking against them and getting points in each one and winning money? So I think they're probably a little bit better than what I have on their seating. But I could definitely see them in your seating for sure. I think we've wrapped up all mine. I had Michigan State and Iowa State as my last 2 6 seeds. So what do you got left in the 6 seed side of things?
Okay, we're going to finish up. I've got 2 left. We're going to go to my Tennessee Vols. They got a big game coming up against this LSU this Saturday. And, speaking of LSU, this Tennessee team is very similar to this LSU team. They really thrive on their defense, but struggle to find points when they need them, especially in the half-court game. So we'll see if they can adapt their style, but Tennessee's going to probably keep falling if they can't find some answers offensively. But so far they've done enough to get a 6 seed. And then my last spot, and I went back and forth. I wanted to put Loyola Chicago here, but I'm going to put Providence here just because, they keep winning basketball games. They've only got 2 losses. Schedule's been kind of weak. And it's not pretty because their 2 losses, I think they lost by almost 20 points.
Yeah.
So they it depends on if they're going to show up or not. They had I think it was a 30-point loss to Marquette.
Yeah.
I like this Providence team, but Loyola Chicago, BYU, a few of those other teams are right there on the edge, peeking in, and it's going to move a lot here in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, I did not. I had Tennessee in my sort of next up list just because I just haven't seen the consistency in wins. Yeah. Basically, every loss they have is to a good team, and then every win they have, other than the nice win versus Arizona, which is a really nice win, I don't think you really mark down anything as a great win other than that. Maybe you sort of give a check mark with a North Carolina win, but that's not a great North Carolina team. No. I think, if you watched them the other night versus Miami, who basically throttled them in the first half, and then that Colorado win, tough road win, I guess, but it's not a very good, Colorado team. So it's just sort of hard for me to be like, yeah, I'm putting Tennessee in the 6th seed when every time they've played a good team, Villanova, Texas Tech, Alabama, LSU, Kentucky, all have been, losses. And you don't want to overreact to the Kentucky game, but they just got freaking hammered in that one. And yeah. I think I sort of, knock it down a little bit there. And then Providence, they were also on my sort of next up list. I just thought Loyola Chicago, loss-wise, was better losses, at least closer losses. Yeah. They don't have a loss where they just get hammered and don't show up. I don't even know if that really means anything, but when, you're sort of looking back on the schedule and you look at Providence and you're like, why did they lose by 40 to Marquette? And then you look on the schedule and it's like Loyola Chicago loses to 7 to Auburn. You're like, well, that and that. And Seton Hall and San Diego State were the other 2 teams I had on my sort of next up tier to move into, those top seeded range. All right, let's get into our games of the week. I had a handful of games this week, not the biggest of weekend showdowns, but a handful of matchups I'm interested in this week.
Yeah, I've got about 4 or 5 that I was looking at. So whenever you're ready, we'll start going through.
All right. I'm going to kick off Friday. I had a couple games in there. I had Wisconsin, Michigan State. So I think this could be part of the Yahtzee jumble. I might move Wisconsin in there if they can beat Michigan State and flip-flop those two. That was definitely one to watch. And then a big MAC showdown. Toledo, Ohio, easily the two top teams in the MAC. Ohio's been really, really good. Toledo's been solid. I think Ohio's probably the better team here. But that's a nice little preview of the two top teams in the MAC. And then I sort of comboed this. Bryant is playing Merrimack. Bryant and Wagner, the two top teams in the Northeast Conference. Merrimack's just right behind them, and they play Friday night Bryant. Sunday, they play Wagner. So they have a chance to sort of move themselves into a spot in the Northeast Conference where we take them a little bit more seriously. Traditionally, they've always been a much better home team than a road team. That sort of continued the trend here, but I'm curious to see if they could sort of match up with Wagner and Bryant here, the two powers in the Northeast Conference on Friday.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and go with I've got 4 on Saturday, so I'll go ahead and go through them. You can talk about them if you've got them on there, but, you know, the game of the week, I guess we'll finish with that one. I'm going to start off with one that I'm watching in the Big 12 is Baylor and Oklahoma. This isn't the game of the week. We'll finish with that.
I had UNC Wilmington Townsend as the game in the week.
Okay. I'm interested to see this Oklahoma team. They're they need a big staple win, and you know they got that one over. I believe it was Iowa State, but I think a win over Baylor would be huge. And then you also looking for the consistency from Baylor, see if they can recover and put together another streak. So that's something to watch there. And then another one I just talked about, I think this LSU Tennessee matchup is big for both of these teams. LSU's on a 2-game losing streak. They need to rebound, and Tennessee needs another signature win. And they're looking for revenge for their loss to LSU a few weeks ago. And then one more I'm keeping my eye on in the ACC. I really like this Miami-Florida State matchup on Saturday. Yeah. I'm curious to see which one of these teams is going to climb up the rungs, the rankings in the ACC. I think Miami's playing well. You know, Florida State's scrappy, so we'll see which one of these teams comes out of that one.
Yeah, you mentioned it. I'm really curious about that Florida State-Miami game. I think that'll be a really good game. Miami started to play really, really good basketball. They got a full, healthy roster, which they haven't had in a couple years. Larga has them playing pretty well. A little bit of a down team for Florida State this year, but a nice win versus Duke this week, and maybe they're starting to sort of round into shape and play pretty good basketball. Just really interesting in the ACC because, I don't think there's a dominant team. You probably put Duke on that top line, but then after that, you could probably name me about 10 teams who are in and around there in the Louisville, Miami, Florida State, Virginia, just a mix of sort of one day we look good, the next day we look awful sort of mix. So really curious about that Florida State Miami game. You mentioned the Tennessee LSU game. That should be really, really another chance for Tennessee, to sort of get a win versus a top tier team and to see how LSU sort of recovers after, back-to-back, I don't want to say bad losses because that's overreacting. Losses to teams that technically weren't ranked, though I think we both think Arkansas and Alabama, pretty good teams. So not necessarily bad losses, but see how they bounce back from those losses. And then you mentioned the big game of the week. We'll talk about it now, but Kentucky-Auburn, really, really big, showdown here. This will probably be Auburn's, I think, toughest test of the year so far. We'll see how they match up, and we'll see really if Kentucky, who's played for really good basketball for about 3 weeks now, can go in there and sort of beat up on Auburn. Auburn sort of had Kentucky's number the last handful of years too. Now, granted, those have not been powerhouse Kentucky team. So this is probably the best Kentucky team that the Auburn team has played since they've sort of become a power in the SEC. You talked about the Oklahoma game. That'll be really, really interesting. I'm just curious where Oklahoma sits, right now, because they started out really, really well, but I haven't thought they've looked great to close out the to start out the Big 12 season so far. I mentioned my game of week in the Colonial Conference. Two top teams showdown, UNC Wilmington versus Townsend. That should be a pretty good matchup. If you want to see probably the two best teams in the Colonial, give you a little bit of a preview. In the Missouri Valley, Missouri State goes to Loyola Chicago. I talked about Missouri State, probably them and Drake, second best team. If one of these teams wants to sort of try to make a name for themselves, they need to get, a win here. I think Loyola Chicago will probably be an at-large team, so there's a chance there for one of those two to maybe get an automatic bid if they win their conference. The problem with that is Loyola Chicago is on a different level. So I'm curious to see if Missouri State can, sort of play with them. Louisiana Tech, UAB matchup this weekend. That's probably the two best teams in Conference USA, other than maybe Liberty. But I've watched Louisiana Tech play. Pretty fun, interesting team to watch. So that should be a good showdown. And then I talked about it. Drake playing Northern Iowa in the MVC should be an interesting matchup as well. North Carolina, Wake Forest. We talked about the jumble in the ACC. North Carolina coming off a really sort of bad loss to Miami. Granted, it was in Miami, but the way they just got throttled by about 30 points in that first half just was a little bit embarrassing, and sort of what has happened to North Carolina all year long. They get blown out, or they sort of are blowing some other team out. It's really weird. And if you were looking for probably the second best team in the ACC so far, it might be Wake. I don't know what that says about the ACC, but Wake's played pretty good basketball. So
Wake football and basketball school.
Yes, I know. We're in a world where Wake Forest has now become the dominant athletic team in the ACC. I think 2,000 of their student population. But I'm curious to see how North Carolina bounce back and if Wake can continue to play good basketball. This Texas A&M Arkansas game. Texas A&M started out the season really well. Tough loss to Kentucky. Arkansas, I don't think either of us have a read on this team. They're winning by 50 or losing to Missouri or something on the year. So there's no telling what we're getting from Arkansas. But the last 2 weeks have been good Arkansas. Yeah. When Arkansas plays well, I think they can be a contender in this SEC conference.
They're not a team I would want to run into in the tournament, because they could end up falling to somewhere in like the 8-9 range, and that would be a rough matchup.
Yeah, that just an interesting team, and I want to see if Buzz Williams can keep Texas A&M relevant here. And then big showdown in the Mountain West, Boise State versus San Diego State. Also on Saturday. I think there's a chance 4 teams out of the Mountain West could sneak in there. Boise State, San Diego State, Colorado State being the top 3. Your boys out of Fresno are playing pretty good basketball. They got a couple bad losses in there, but if they can make a push, they can sort of throw their name in the hat. But Boise State, San Diego State, definitely something to watch. And then we'll go on to Sunday. There wasn't a ton Sunday, but Xavier Marquette, I think, will be a really, really nice showdown. And then I mentioned the combo package with Mary Mack versus Wagner in the Northeast Conference. Anything on Sunday that you had that I didn't touch on?
I didn't see anything on Sunday of note other than that Xavier matchup you were just talking about.
And the Wagner Mary Mack matchup. Will you be on ESPN Plus watching that one instead of the playoff games?
I'm pretty sure there's a big NFL game Sunday, maybe.
Well, I'll have Wagner Mary Mack on.
My game is Saturday. So
yes, your game is Saturday. So
I know.
All right, that's our first college basketball show in the books with Dynamite David. We'll be back on Monday to review all that went down over the weekend. Be sure to like and subscribe. That's our show, and we're out.
He's driving, he's jamming, and he's slamming to get the through for the win. Good! They did it! There's the pass to Leitner. Puts it on. Whitburn.